The stagecoach rattled into Leavenworth, Kansas on a bitter October morning in 1873, carrying a woman who had forgotten how to smile. Natalie Kendrick pressed her black-gloved hand against the dusty window, watching the frontier town emerge through the morning haze like something from a dream she could not quite remember. Her morning dress, now wrinkled and stained from 3 weeks of travel, hung loose on her frame. She had lost weight since Thomas died, though she barely noticed such things anymore. The world had become a series of motions she performed without feeling, without purpose, without joy. The stage driver called out their arrival, his voice rough and weary. Natalie gathered her single carpetbag and stepped down onto the wooden platform, her legs unsteady after so many hours confined to the cramped coach. Around her, Leavenworth bustled with morning activity. Wagons rolled past laden with supplies. Men shouted to one another across the wide dirt street. Somewhere a dog barked. The whole town seemed alive with energy and purpose, which only made the emptiness inside her feel more profound. She stood alone on the platform, uncertain what to do next. The advertisement had been simple enough: rancher seeking wife. Must be of good character and willing to work. The man's name was Josiah Shepherd, and he had sent her enough money for passage from St. Louis, along with a brief letter explaining he would meet her stage. But now, surrounded by strangers in a town she had never seen, Natalie wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "Mrs. Kendrick." She turned toward the voice and found herself looking up at a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of summer sky. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously as he spoke. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his face bore the lines of someone who spent his days outdoors. He wore clean clothes, she noticed. He had made an effort. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Shepherd, Josiah," he said, and offered a smile that seemed genuine despite the awkwardness of their meeting. "I appreciate you coming all this way. I know it must have been difficult." The word seemed inadequate for the journey she had taken, and not just the physical miles from St. Louis. Since Thomas had been thrown from that spooked horse 18 months ago, every day had been difficult. Every breath had been difficult. When her sister had shown her the advertisement 3 months past, Natalie had stared at it for a long time before deciding that perhaps a new life, even one built on practical arrangement rather than love, might be better than slowly fading away in the house she had shared with her late husband. "I can manage," she said, which was what she always said now. Josiah studied her face for a moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Let me take your bag," he said gently. "My wagon is just down the street." The ranch is about an hour's ride north of town. She followed him through the busy street, aware of curious glances from passers-by. A mail-order bride was not uncommon in these parts, she knew, but it still drew attention. Josiah walked with a slight limp, she noticed, favoring his left leg. He loaded her bag into the back of a sturdy wagon, and then helped her up onto the bench seat with surprising gentleness. As they left the town behind, following a well-worn trail through rolling prairie land, Josiah attempted conversation. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he raised and the horses he bred. He mentioned that he had a small house, modest but solid, that he had built himself with help from neighbors. He explained that his cook had left to get married a month ago, and he had been managing alone since then, though not particularly well. Natalie listened, but contributed little. She found she had nothing to say. The landscape rolling past seemed foreign and strange, so different from the gentle hills of Missouri where she had grown up. Here everything felt vast and exposed, the sky too big, the horizon too far away. I should tell you something, Josiah said after a long stretch of silence. I know you are recently widowed. It was in your letter. I want you to know I do not expect anything from you except your presence. We can take whatever time you need to adjust. I am not looking to replace anyone's memory. I just thought perhaps two lonely people might make a good partnership. His honesty surprised her. She glanced at him, really looking at him for the first time. His profile was strong, his jaw set with determination, but there was kindness in the set of his mouth. "Thank you," she managed. "How long has it been?" he asked quietly, "if you do not mind my asking." 18 months. He was thrown from a horse. His neck broke instantly. The words came out flat, rehearsed from too many tellings. Josiah nodded slowly. "I am sorry. That is a terrible thing." They rode in silence for a while longer. The sun climbed higher, warming the October air despite the season. Natalie found herself noticing small things despite her numbness. The way the prairie grass rippled in the wind like waves on water. The call of a hawk circling overhead. The solid, steady presence of the man beside her. "I lost my father 2 years ago," Josiah said eventually. "He was the one who started the ranch. Worked himself into an early grave, my mother always said. She passed when I was 15, so it was just him and me for a long time. When he died, I kept working the ranch because I did not know what else to do. But the house felt empty. Everything felt empty." He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I am not good at being alone. Some men are, but I am not one of them. I figured honest companionship, even if it starts as an arrangement, might be better than the silence." His words struck something deep inside her, a recognition she was not ready to acknowledge. She turned her face away, watching the prairie instead of him. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was better than she had expected. The house was indeed modest, a simple wooden structure with a covered porch, but it was well built and looked sturdy against the elements. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and fields stretching out in all directions. Everything was neat and orderly, showing that Josiah took pride in his work. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her bag inside. The interior was spare but clean. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and 2 small bedrooms. Josiah showed her to the larger of the 2. "This was my father's room," he said. "I have been using the smaller one since he passed. You take this one. It has more space and a better window." "I could not take your room," Natalie protested weakly. "It is not my room anymore," he said firmly but gently. "It is yours now. Make yourself comfortable. I will be outside tending to the animals if you need anything." Left alone, Natalie sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the simple room. There was a wardrobe, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small table with an oil lamp. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling across the rough wooden floor. It was nothing like the home she had shared with Thomas, with its wallpaper and carpets and carefully chosen furniture. This was a frontier home, practical and plain. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses in the wardrobe, setting out her hairbrush and the daguerreotype of Thomas she could not bring herself to leave behind. She stared at his image for a long moment, at his serious expression frozen in time, and felt the familiar weight of grief settle over her like a physical thing. That evening, Josiah cooked supper, or attempted to. He fried salt pork and heated beans, made coffee that was too strong, and apologized for the simplicity of the meal. They ate at a rough wooden table, the silence between them awkward but not unkind. "I was not exaggerating about needing help with the cooking," he said, attempting humor. "I can manage the basics, but I have been eating the same 3 meals for a month now." "I can cook," Natalie said quietly. "I will take over the kitchen tomorrow." "I would be grateful," he said. Then, more carefully, "But only if you feel up to it. I do not want you to feel obligated." She nodded, but said nothing more. After supper, she helped him clean the dishes, and then she retreated to her room, exhausted from travel and emotion. She lay in the unfamiliar bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the prairie night outside her window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The wind whispered through the grass, and in the next room she could hear Josiah moving about quietly, giving her space, respecting her grief. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Natalie rose early and prepared breakfast. She cooked and cleaned and did laundry. She tended a small vegetable garden near the house that had been neglected in recent weeks. She performed all these tasks with mechanical efficiency, her mind elsewhere, her heart still locked away in that place of perpetual mourning. Josiah worked the ranch from dawn until dusk. He mended fences and tended cattle. He worked with his horses, breaking them to saddle with patience and skill. He came in each evening tired and dusty, always grateful for the meal she had prepared, always careful to give her space. He did not push her to talk or smile or engage beyond what was necessary. He simply existed beside her, a steady presence that asked for nothing. 2 weeks passed this way. Then one evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, Josiah spoke into the comfortable silence. "There is a social gathering in town this Saturday. A barn dance at the McKinney place. Most of the ranchers and townspeople attend. I usually go, at least for a little while. I thought you might like to meet some of the neighbors, but if you would rather stay here, I understand." Natalie's first instinct was to refuse. The idea of being surrounded by strangers, of having to smile and make conversation, felt overwhelming. But something in Josiah's expression made her reconsider. He was not demanding her presence. He was offering her a choice, a chance to be part of this community if she wanted it. "I will go," she heard herself say, surprising them both. Saturday arrived cool and clear. Natalie dressed in her best dress, which was still black but at least made of better fabric than her everyday clothes. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and studied herself in the small mirror. She looked thin and pale, she thought. There were shadows under her eyes, but she looked presentable enough. The ride to the McKinney ranch was pleasant. Josiah told her about the various families they would meet, giving her context and history, making it easier to remember names and connections. His thoughtfulness touched her, though she kept that feeling carefully buried. The barn had been cleared and decorated with lanterns. A fiddler and a guitarist were already playing when they arrived, and couples were dancing enthusiastically. Long tables held food and drink. Children ran about playing games. The whole scene was warm and lively, and full of the kind of joy that Natalie had forgotten existed. Several women approached immediately, curious and welcoming. Martha Henderson, the wife of a neighboring rancher, took charge of introductions. She was a plump, cheerful woman with a ready smile and kind eyes. "It is so good to meet you, dear," she said warmly. "We have all been so curious about Josiah's bride. He is a good man, one of the best. You will be very happy here, I am sure." Natalie forced a small smile and murmured appropriate responses. The women around her chattered easily, asking questions about her journey, her impressions of Kansas, her plans for the ranch. She answered briefly, not rudely but without elaboration. After a while, they seemed to sense her reticence and turned their conversation to local matters, including her in a way that did not demand much participation. Josiah danced with several women, she noticed, but he kept glancing back at her, making sure she was comfortable. When he finally approached and asked if she would like to dance, she hesitated. She had not danced since Thomas died. It felt wrong somehow, disloyal. Just one dance, Josiah said gently. "If you hate it, we will leave immediately." She let him lead her onto the floor. The fiddler struck up a waltz and Josiah took her hand, placing his other hand carefully at her waist. He was a good dancer, she discovered, moving with confidence despite his limp. He led her through the steps patiently, not minding when she stumbled. "You are doing fine," he murmured. "Just follow my lead." The music swelled around them, and Natalie found herself moving without thinking, her body remembering the patterns even as her mind remained distant. She focused on Josiah's shoulder, on the solid warmth of his hand holding hers, on the way he moved with such gentleness. When the song ended, he did not immediately release her. Instead, he looked down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That was nice." She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Something about the moment, about the kindness in his eyes, had cracked something inside her. She excused herself quickly and found a quiet corner, struggling to compose herself. Martha found her there a few minutes later. "Are you all right, dear?" "I am fine," Natalie said automatically. "I just needed some air." The older woman studied her with knowing eyes. "Josiah told me you lost your husband. I lost my first husband too, many years ago. Yellow fever. I thought I would never recover from it. I thought the grief would swallow me whole." Natalie looked up at her, startled by this revelation. "But you remarried." "Eventually, yes. It took time, though, and it took meeting the right person, someone who understood that grief is not something you get over. It is something you learn to carry." Martha patted her hand. "Josiah is a good man, patient, kind. Give yourself time, dear, and give him a chance." The words stayed with Natalie long after they left the dance. On the ride home, she found herself watching Josiah more carefully. He had been patient with her, she realized. For 2 weeks he had asked nothing of her except her presence. He had not pressured her or made demands. He had simply been there, steady and kind, waiting for her to find her footing. "Did you enjoy the evening?" he asked as they neared the ranch. "Parts of it," she admitted. It was the most honest she had been with him since arriving. He nodded, seeming to understand that this was progress. "That is more than I hoped for." November arrived with colder weather and gray skies. Natalie continued her routines, but something had shifted slightly. She found herself noticing Josiah more, the small ways he showed consideration. How he always brought in extra firewood before a storm. How he fixed the latch on the kitchen door without being asked. How he never pushed her to talk, but was always willing to listen when she did. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, she found him on the porch staring out at the white, dusted prairie. She brought him a cup of coffee and stood beside him in silence for a moment. "It is beautiful," she said quietly, watching the snow drift down through the lamplight. "First snow of the season," he said. "My father always said the first snow was magical. He said it covered all the old mistakes and let you start fresh." Natalie considered this. "Do you believe that?" "I would like to," Josiah said. He turned to look at her, his expression serious in the dim light. "Natalie, I want you to know something. I know this arrangement was not what either of us might have chosen under different circumstances, but I am glad you came. Even if you never feel more for me than simple companionship, I am still glad. You make this house feel like a home again." His words struck deep, touching that carefully protected place inside her. She wanted to respond, to say something equally honest, but the words would not come. Instead, she reached out and briefly touched his arm, a small gesture but significant for someone who had been so closed off. He understood. His hand covered hers for just a moment, warm and solid, before she pulled away. They stood together watching the snow fall, not speaking, but something had changed between them. A door had opened just slightly. December brought harsh weather and long nights. The ranch work became more demanding as Josiah struggled to keep the cattle fed and the horses safe from the cold. Natalie found herself worrying about him when he was out in the bitter wind, found herself watching for his return with growing anxiety. She made sure there was always hot food waiting, always coffee ready, always a warm fire in the hearth. One particularly brutal night, Josiah came in covered in snow and shaking with cold. He had been out searching for a missing calf and had gotten caught in a sudden storm. Natalie took one look at him and sprang into action. She heated water for a bath, made him strip out of his frozen clothes and wrapped him in blankets while his bath warmed. She prepared hot soup and tea and hovered over him with uncharacteristic fussing. "I am fine," he protested, though his lips were still blue. "Just cold." "You are half frozen," she corrected sharply. "Get in that bath before you lose any toes." He obeyed, too cold to argue. She left him to bathe in privacy but kept checking through the door to make sure he was recovering. When he finally emerged, dressed in dry clothes and wrapped in a quilt, she made him sit by the fire and drink the soup. "You scared me," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. He looked up at her, surprise evident in his eyes. "I did," she nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Thomas died so suddenly. One moment he was fine and then he was gone. When you did not come back when expected, I thought." "I am sorry," Josiah said quietly. "I should have been more careful. I did not think about how you might worry." "I do not want to lose anyone else," she whispered, the admission costing her dearly. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently. "I will always come back, Natalie. I promise you that. I will always do everything in my power to come back to you." She looked at their joined hands, at the way his calloused fingers held hers with such care. Something inside her, something that had been frozen for 18 months, began to thaw. It was painful, like blood returning to a numb limb, but it was also necessary. She was beginning to feel again, whether she wanted to or not. Christmas approached, and Josiah asked if she would like to go to the church service in town. She agreed, finding that she wanted to be part of the community's celebration. They rode to town on Christmas Eve, the night clear and cold and full of stars. The small church was packed with families, warm with candlelight and voices raised in carols. Sitting beside Josiah in the pew, listening to the familiar hymns, Natalie felt tears slip down her cheeks. She had not cried, not really cried, since Thomas died. She had been too locked in shock, too frozen in grief. But now, surrounded by music and warmth and life, something broke open inside her. Josiah noticed immediately. He pulled out his handkerchief and handed it to her wordlessly, then gently took her hand again. He did not try to stop her tears or tell her everything would be fine. He simply held her hand and let her cry, his presence steady and supportive. After the service, as they prepared to ride home, he spoke quietly. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said, and realized it was true. The tears had released something, some pressure she had been carrying without knowing it. "I think I needed that. Grief is like that sometimes," he said. "It has to come out eventually." On the ride home, emboldened by emotion and the magic of the night, she asked, "Why did you limp?" "I have noticed it since the first day but never asked." He was quiet for a moment. "A bull caught me against a fence 3 years ago, crushed my leg pretty badly. The doctor said I was lucky to keep it. It healed, but it never came back quite right. Does not slow me down too much, though." "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes when the weather is bad, but I have gotten used to it." He glanced at her. "Does it bother you?" "No," she said immediately. "I just wanted to understand. I have been so wrapped up in my own pain that I have not thought much about yours." "We all carry something," he said simply. "The trick is learning to carry it together." The words resonated with her. She thought about them as they reached the ranch, as they went inside to the warm house, as she prepared hot cider for them both. They sat together by the fire, talking more openly than they ever had before. He told her about his childhood, about growing up on the ranch, about his mother who had loved to sing. She told him about Thomas, really told him, sharing memories both sweet and painful. She told him about the life they had planned, the children they had hoped for, the dreams that had died with him. Josiah listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything. He simply listened, and his listening was a gift. "You think you will ever stop missing him?" he asked gently. "I do not know," she admitted. "But I think maybe missing him and moving forward can exist together. They do not have to be opposites." "No," he agreed. "They do not." The new year arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. The ranch became an isolated world, cut off from town by impassable drifts. Josiah and Natalie were alone together for weeks, relying on each other for company and support. The forced closeness might have been uncomfortable earlier in their arrangement, but now it felt natural. They developed new routines. Evening meals became longer, filled with conversation. After supper, they would sit by the fire together, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes simply enjoying the quiet companionship. Josiah taught her to play checkers, and she taught him card games she had learned as a child. The house no longer felt empty or echoing. It felt alive. One night in late January, a harsh blizzard struck with little warning. The wind howled around the house like a living thing, and snow piled high against the walls. They sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets, listening to the storm rage. "I am glad you are here," Josiah said suddenly. "I am glad I do not have to weather this storm alone." "So am I," Natalie admitted, and she meant it. Somewhere over the past months, this house had become home. This man had become someone she trusted, someone she cared about. It was not the passionate romance she had shared with Thomas. It was something different, something steadier, but no less real. The next morning they woke to find the barn door had blown open in the night. Several of the horses had gotten loose and were struggling in the deep snow. Josiah immediately went out to rescue them, and Natalie insisted on helping despite his protests. They worked together in the bitter cold, coaxing the frightened animals back to shelter, checking each one for injuries. One of the horses, a young mare Josiah was particularly fond of, had a nasty cut on her leg. He tended to it carefully, his hands gentle and skilled, watching him. Natalie felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with physical temperature. He was such a good man, she thought. Strong but gentle, capable but kind. He never complained about the hard work or the harsh conditions. He simply did what needed to be done, day after day, with quiet determination. "You are staring at me," he said without looking up from bandaging the horse's leg. She flushed. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am," she said quietly. "That you were the one who placed that advertisement, that I chose to answer it." He looked up at her then, his eyes intense despite the cold. "Natalie." "I am not saying I am ready for anything," she said quickly, suddenly nervous. "I am still figuring things out, but I want you to know that I see you. I appreciate everything you have done for me, everything you are. You have been so patient and kind, and I just wanted you to know that it matters. You matter." He stood slowly, still holding her gaze. "You matter to me too." More than I expected, more than I probably should admit. They stood there in the barn, breath fogging in the cold air, the storm still howling outside, and something passed between them. An understanding, an acknowledgement, the beginning of something new. February brought a thaw, and with it came the opportunity to go to town. Natalie found she was eager to see the neighbors again, to be part of the community. At the general store, Martha Henderson greeted her warmly. "You look different," Martha said, studying her. "Better. There is color in your cheeks again." I suppose there is, Natalie said, surprised to realize it was true. She did feel different, not cured of grief but no longer drowning in it. Josiah looks different too, Martha continued with a knowing smile. Happier. You are good for each other, I think. The words stayed with Natalie. Good for each other. Was that what they were? She thought about how natural it had become to work beside him, to plan meals considering his preferences, to look forward to their evening conversations. She thought about how she worried when he was late coming in, how she noticed the small things he did to make her life easier, how his presence had become essential to her sense of home. That evening, after supper, Josiah suggested they take a walk. The weather was mild for February, and the sunset was spectacular, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. They walked together toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch, not speaking but comfortable in the silence. At the top of the rise, Josiah stopped and turned to face her. The dying light caught in his hair and softened the lines of his face. He looked young and uncertain, nothing like the steady rancher who faced every challenge with quiet confidence. "Natalie, I need to tell you something," he said. "I know we started this as a practical arrangement. I know you were not looking for romance or love, but I have to be honest with you. Somewhere along the way, my feelings changed. You have become more than just a companion to me. I think about you all the time. I look forward to coming home because you are there. When you smile, which is still rare but getting more frequent, it makes my whole day better. I am not asking you to feel the same way. I am just asking you to know the truth." Her heart pounded in her chest. She had known, on some level, that this moment would come. She had felt the change in how he looked at her, how he found excuses to touch her hand or shoulder. But hearing him say it out loud made it real and terrifying. "Josiah," she whispered, "I do not know if I can give you what you deserve. My heart is still so damaged." "I am not asking for your whole heart," he said gently. "Just whatever part you can give. Even if it is just friendship, even if it never becomes more, I will take what you can offer and be grateful for it." She looked up at him, at his kind face and patient eyes, and felt something shift inside her. It was not the overwhelming passion she had felt for Thomas, not that first love burning bright and fast. This was something different, something quieter but no less powerful. It was built on respect and trust, on shared struggles and small kindnesses, on the steady accumulation of days spent together. "I care about you," she said carefully, testing the words. "More than I expected to, more than I thought I could again. I am not ready to say all the things you might want to hear, but I want to try. I want to see what this could become." Joy flashed across his face, bright and unguarded. "That is more than enough. That is everything." He reached for her hand and she gave it to him. They stood together on the rise, watching the last light fade from the sky, holding hands like young people discovering love for the first time. But they were not young people. They were two souls who had known loss and loneliness, who had learned that life could be hard and unfair, and who were choosing despite all that to reach for happiness again. March came with wind and rain and the first signs of spring. The prairie began to green, wildflowers emerged in scattered patches, and the cattle grew restless after the long winter. The ranch demanded constant attention, and Josiah worked from dawn to dark most days. But he always made time in the evening to sit with Natalie, to talk about their days, to simply be together. One evening, he came in to find her in the kitchen attempting to bake a cake. She had flour on her nose and frustration in her expression. "The stove temperature is impossible to judge," she said irritably. "I have burned 2 attempts already." He came up behind her, looking over her shoulder at the batter. "My mother used to say you had to learn to read the stove's moods. Each one is different." "That is not particularly helpful advice," she said. But she was smiling. He laughed, the sound warm and rich. Then, almost hesitantly, he reached out and wiped the flour from her nose. The gesture was tender and intimate, and they both froze as awareness crackled between them. "Natalie," he said softly, his hand still hovering near her face. She turned to face him fully, her heart racing. They were standing so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She looked up at him, at his eyes so full of longing and hope, and made a decision. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and sweet, exploratory rather than demanding. His arms came around her carefully, as if he was afraid she might bolt. But she did not bolt. Instead, she leaned into him, letting herself feel safe and wanted and cherished for the first time in so long. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for months," he admitted. "I know," she said. "I could tell. I just needed time." "Was it all right?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "Kissing me?" "Yes," she said, and found she meant it completely. It was more than all right. They kissed again, longer this time, with more confidence. And when she felt his hands tighten on her waist, when she heard the small sound of pleasure he made, she felt an answering heat rise in her own body. Desire, she realized with shock. She had thought that part of her had died with Thomas, but apparently it had only been sleeping. "We should probably stop," Josiah said reluctantly, pulling back slightly. "I do not want to rush you." "I know you would not," she said. "That is one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them. Love. She had said it without thinking, but once said, she could not take it back. And looking at the wonder in his face, she did not want to. "You love me?" he asked, as if he could not quite believe it. "I think I do," she said slowly, testing the truth of it. "Not the same way I love Thomas." "That was different, but this is real too. This is real and solid and true. Yes, Josiah, I love you." He swept her into his arms then, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite his bad leg. She laughed, actually laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. When he set her down, they were both grinning like fools. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "Really marry me. I know we already signed papers, but I mean in the church with people there. I want everyone to know you are mine and I am yours." "We are already married," she pointed out, but she was still smiling. "A legal arrangement made for convenience," he said. "I want more than that now. I want to stand up in front of God and everyone and pledge myself to you properly. Will you let me do that?" She thought about it. Thought about what it would mean to make that public commitment, to acknowledge before the community that this was a real marriage, a real partnership, a real love. It felt like a betrayal of Thomas for just a moment, but then she realized he would not have wanted her to be alone forever. He would have wanted her to find happiness again. "Yes," she said, "let us do it properly." They were married for the second time on a bright April morning in the Leavenworth church, the same church where she had cried at Christmas, but this time she was smiling through happy tears. She wore a new dress, pale blue rather than black, that Martha Henderson had helped her make. Josiah wore his best suit and looked more handsome than she had ever seen him. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. When the Reverend asked if Josiah would take Natalie to be his wife, to honor and cherish her all his days, he said, "I will," with such conviction that several women in the congregation sighed. When Natalie made her own vows, she looked directly into Josiah's eyes and meant every word. The kiss he gave her when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife was chaste due to the setting, but it promised more for later. The congregation cheered and they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, toward their new life. The community threw them a celebration at the Henderson Ranch. There was music and dancing and food in abundance. Natalie danced with Josiah repeatedly, no longer awkward or hesitant but joyful and free. When Martha pulled her aside for a moment, the older woman had tears in her eyes. "I am so happy for you, dear," Martha said, embracing her. "You have come so far from that sad woman who arrived last October. You have let yourself heal, let yourself love again. That takes tremendous courage." "I had help," Natalie said, glancing at Josiah across the room. "He never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself." "That is what love should be," Martha said wisely. "Patient and kind and willing to wait for the right moment." That night, when they returned to the ranch, to the house that had become home, Josiah carried her over the threshold even though she protested she was too heavy. He set her down in the main room, now lit by lamplight and glowing with warmth. "Welcome home, Mrs. Shepherd," he said, pulling her close. "I have been here for months," she pointed out, but she was smiling. "Not like this," he said. "Not as my wife in truth as well as in name." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, with all the passion he had been carefully controlling for months. She responded with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, her body pressing against his. They had waited so long for this moment, building the foundation of trust and friendship that would support everything else. When he pulled back to look at her questioningly, to make sure she was ready for what would come next, she took his hand and led him toward the bedroom. Their bedroom now, she realized. Not his room or her room, but theirs together. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a discovery of each other without rushing or awkwardness. Josiah was patient and gentle, mindful of her lingering grief even in the midst of passion. And Natalie found that her body remembered pleasure, remembered desire, remembered joy. It was not a betrayal of what she had lost, but an affirmation that she was still alive, still capable of feeling, still able to embrace happiness. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, she felt at peace for the first time in 2 years. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, his hand stroking her hair, "for being patient, for not giving up on me, for showing me that it is possible to love again." "Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher," he said. "Thank you for coming all this way and giving me your heart." "You earned it," she said simply. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Natalie threw herself into making the house truly a home, sewing curtains and planting flowers and adding small touches of beauty wherever she could. Josiah worked with renewed energy, knowing he was building something not just for himself but for them together, for their future. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Their friendship provided a solid foundation, and the passion they had discovered added joy and excitement. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, never quite getting over the wonder of having found each other. In late summer, Natalie began to suspect she might be pregnant. The possibility filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of bearing Josiah's child, but also fear and grief, because she and Thomas had been trying for a baby when he died, and this felt like closing the door on that dream forever. She told Josiah one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I might be expecting." He went very still. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but fairly sure." He turned to her, his face full of wonder and concern. "How do you feel about it?" Trust him to ask that, she thought. Not just excitement or celebration, but genuine concern for her emotional state. "I am happy," she said honestly. "Scared, but happy. I wanted children with Thomas, and I grieved when that became impossible. But now I realize I want children with you even more, because I know the life we will build together." Relief flooded his expression. "I was worried you might see it as a betrayal." "I did at first," she admitted, "for about 5 minutes. But then I realized that loving you does not diminish what I felt for Thomas. Both loves can be real. Both can matter. The heart is bigger than we think." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent. "I love you so much, and I am terrified but thrilled about becoming a father." "We will figure it out together," she assured him. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall. As Natalie's belly swelled, Josiah became increasingly protective and attentive. He insisted she rest more, took over tasks he deemed too strenuous, and worried constantly about her well-being. She found it endearing even when it was excessive. Winter arrived again, a full year since that blizzard when they had first acknowledged their growing feelings. Now, instead of grief and isolation, the house was full of anticipation and love. They spent the long winter evenings planning for the baby, discussing names and possibilities, dreaming about the future. "What if I am a terrible father?" Josiah asked one night, voicing a fear he had been carrying. "You will not be," Natalie said confidently. "You are patient and kind and good. Those are the qualities that matter most." "My father was hard," he admitted. "He worked constantly and expected the same from me. I never felt like I could live up to his standards." "Then you will do better," she said firmly. "You already know what not to do, and you will have me to help you. We are in this together." He pulled her close, mindful of her belly between them. "I do not deserve you." "Yes, you do," she said. "You absolutely do." Their son was born on a cold March morning in 1875 after a long but uncomplicated labor. Martha Henderson attended as midwife, with Josiah anxiously pacing outside until Martha finally allowed him in to meet his child. Natalie would never forget the look on his face when he first held his son. Wonder and terror and overwhelming love all mixed together. He held the tiny baby so carefully as if he might break, and tears streamed down his face unashamedly. "He is perfect," Josiah whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Joseph, honoring both Natalie's first husband and Josiah's father. It felt right to Natalie, a way of acknowledging the past while embracing the future. When Martha raised an eyebrow at the choice, Natalie explained simply, "Thomas was part of my life, and I do not want to pretend he was not. Josiah understands that." "He is a wise man," Martha said approvingly. Those first months with the baby were exhausting and wonderful. Josiah was a devoted father, helping with night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. He sang to the baby in a surprisingly good voice, old cowboy songs and lullabies his mother had taught him. Watching him with their son, Natalie fell even more deeply in love. "You were worried about being a bad father," she reminded him one evening, watching him rock Thomas Joseph to sleep. "But look at you. You are wonderful with him." "It is easier than I expected," Josiah admitted quietly. "I just think about what he needs and try to provide it. Same as with the horses, really, but with more love." She laughed at his comparison. "Whatever works." As spring arrived and the baby grew, Natalie found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. 18 months ago, when Thomas had died, she thought her life was over. She had been drowning in grief, unable to imagine a future that held anything but pain. The decision to answer Josiah's advertisement had been born of desperation, a last attempt to find some purpose. But look at her now. She had a husband she loved deeply, a son who brought her joy, a home she cherished, and a community where she belonged. The grief for Thomas had not disappeared, but it had softened into something she could carry without being crushed by it. She could remember him with fondness rather than agony, could acknowledge that what they had shared was real and important without letting it prevent her from embracing what she had now. One evening, as they sat on the porch with baby Thomas sleeping in a cradle between them, Josiah reached over and took her hand. "I have been thinking," he said, "about that day you arrived. You looked so lost and broken. I remember thinking I had made a mistake, that I could not possibly help someone carrying that much pain. "What changed your mind?" she asked, curious. "I saw something in your eyes," he said. "Underneath all that grief, there was strength. You were still standing, still trying, even when everything felt hopeless. I thought maybe if I could just be steady and patient, that strength would have room to grow again. And I was right. You gave me time," she said simply. "Time and space and kindness. You did not try to fix me or change me. You just let me be who I was while showing me it was possible to be someone else too. Let me help you remember joy," he said softly, echoing words he had spoken months ago, early in their marriage, when she had been struggling with a particularly hard day of grief. "That is all I ever wanted to do." "You did more than that," she said, squeezing his hand. "You helped me build a new life. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You showed me that endings can also be beginnings." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of orange and gold. Their son slept peacefully, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and horses whinnied. It was an ordinary evening on an ordinary ranch in Kansas, but to Natalie, it was everything. The years that followed were full and good. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Mary in honor of Josiah's mother, and another son they called Benjamin. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Natalie proved to have a good head for business, helping Josiah make decisions about breeding stock and land management. Their partnership extended beyond the personal into the professional, and they made a formidable team. Thomas Joseph grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 5, he was already following Josiah around the ranch, learning everything he could. Mary was quieter but just as determined, with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. Benjamin was still a baby, chubby and cheerful, loved by everyone. The house rang with laughter and noise, so different from the silent grief that had filled it when Natalie first arrived. They had added rooms to accommodate their growing family, and Natalie had made it beautiful with her careful touches. It was undeniably a home, warm and welcoming, and full of life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, the real one that counted from their church ceremony, Josiah surprised her with a gift. It was a small portrait of the 2 of them, painted by an artist who had passed through Leavenworth. In it, they stood together in front of their ranch house, surrounded by their children, both of them smiling. "So we always remember," he said as she studied it with tears in her eyes. "So we never forget how far we have come." She hung it over the fireplace in the place of honor in their home. But she also kept the daguerreotype of Thomas on her dresser in their bedroom. Josiah had never asked her to remove it, had understood that honoring her past did not diminish her present. Martha Henderson remained a close friend through the years, often joking that she had known from the beginning they would be perfect together. "You both needed someone who understood loss," she said. "Someone who knew that broken things can be mended and made even stronger." As the children grew, Natalie made sure they knew about Thomas, about the man their mother had loved first. She told them stories about him, showed them the daguerreotype, explained that their family had been built on both loss and love. Josiah supported this completely, never threatened by the ghost of her first husband. "He was part of making you who you are," Josiah said once, when Thomas Joseph had asked why his name was partly someone else's. "And I love who you are, so I am grateful to him, even though I never met him." The generosity of that statement, the security in their love that it represented, made Natalie fall in love with her husband all over again. There were hard times, of course. A particularly brutal winter in 1881 that nearly wiped out their herd. A bout of illness that left Mary weak for months. the constant challenges of ranch life and raising children on the frontier. But they faced everything together, their partnership strong enough to weather any storm. In the summer of 1885, a decade after Natalie had first arrived in Leavenworth as a grieving widow, they held a party to celebrate. It was partly for their anniversary, partly just an excuse to gather with friends and neighbors and acknowledge how blessed they were. Standing on their porch, watching her children play with the Henderson grandchildren, watching Josiah laugh with friends, Natalie reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her on that terrible day when Thomas died that she would one day be this happy again, she would never have believed them. The grief had been too consuming, too absolute. But grief, she had learned, was not forever. It could be transformed into something else, something softer. It could coexist with joy. You could honor what you had lost while embracing what you had found. The heart was big enough for both. Josiah came to stand beside her, slipping his arm around her waist in the familiar way that still made her feel safe and cherished. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky I am," she said honestly. "About how that advertisement you placed changed my entire life." "Our lives," he corrected gently. "You changed mine just as much. More, probably. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to really live." "We taught each other," she said, leaning into his embrace. "That is what love is supposed to do." They stood together watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times over the years, but they never got tired of it, never took it for granted. They had both known loss and loneliness. They understood the preciousness of what they had built together. Thomas Joseph, now 10 years old, ran up to them with grass stains on his knees and excitement in his eyes. "Pa, can you show everyone that trick with the rope? The one where you catch 2 posts at once?" Josiah laughed. "I suppose I could do that, though I am getting old for showing off." "You are not old," Mary said, joining them with 7-year-old dignity. "Mama says you are just the right age." "Your mama is wise," Josiah said, winking at Natalie. He headed down to perform his trick for the assembled guests, and the children followed, leaving Natalie alone on the porch for just a moment. She looked out at the prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon, at the land that had become home, at the people who had become family. She thought of Thomas, as she still did sometimes, but with fondness rather than pain. She imagined he would be glad she had found happiness again. She hoped he knew that loving Josiah had not meant forgetting him, just that she had chosen to continue living fully rather than merely existing. Martha appeared beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "You have done well for yourself, dear." "We both have," Natalie said, accepting the glass. "You were right all those years ago. Josiah and I were good for each other." "The best marriages are partnerships," Martha said. "You 2 understand that better than most. You both came to this knowing life could be hard and unfair. You chose to build something good anyway." "He helped me remember joy," Natalie said softly, watching her husband laughing with their children. "When I thought I would never feel it again, he was patient and kind and steadfast. He just kept showing up, kept being there until I could find my way back. And you gave him a family, a purpose, a reason to build rather than just maintain," Martha pointed out. "You saved each other, really." Natalie considered this. Perhaps it was true. They had both been lonely, both been adrift in their own ways. But together they had created something neither could have managed alone. A real home, a real family, a real love built on honesty and patience and mutual respect. As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, as their friends gradually departed, and their children were tucked into bed, Natalie and Josiah found themselves alone on the porch once more. It was their favorite time, these quiet moments at day's end when they could simply be together. "Happy anniversary," Josiah said, pulling her close. "To many more years together." "Many more," she agreed, tilting her face up for his kiss. He obliged, kissing her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night, the same passion that had never faded despite the years, and the children and the endless work of ranch life. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm with love. "I have something to tell you," Natalie said, a small smile playing at her lips. "What is that? I think we might be expecting again." His eyes widened in surprise and delight. "Really? Are you certain?" "Fairly certain," she said. "I know we said 3 was enough, but apparently fate had other ideas." He laughed and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests that she was too old for such things. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Another blessing. You are not upset?" she asked, searching his face. "Upset? I am thrilled. Every child is a gift, Natalie. How could I be anything but happy?" She relaxed against him, relieved and joyful. "I love you so much." "I love you too," he said. "More than I can ever properly express. You took a chance on a lonely cowboy, and you have given me more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." "You gave me my life back," she said simply. "When I had given up on everything, you showed me there was still beauty and joy to be found. You helped me heal. You helped me love again." They stood together under the stars, holding each other close, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their ranch and their sleeping children. Two people who had known loss and loneliness, who had found each other through an unlikely arrangement, who had built something real and lasting and true. The baby arrived the following spring, another boy they named Daniel. He was their last child, and they treasured him accordingly. The house was chaotic with 4 children, but it was a happy chaos, full of love and laughter. As the years continued to pass, as their children grew and eventually began families of their own, Natalie and Josiah's love only deepened. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, raised children together, built a legacy together. Their partnership was the foundation on which everything else rested. On their 20th anniversary, Thomas Joseph, now a young man helping run the ranch, organized a surprise party. Their children and grandchildren gathered, along with friends and neighbors from across the county. It was a celebration of more than just a marriage. It was a celebration of what could be built from grief and loneliness and courage. Natalie stood beside her husband, looking out at the assembled crowd, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about the woman she had been 20 years ago, stepping off that stagecoach in a black mourning dress, unable to imagine ever feeling joy again. She thought about how close she had come to giving up entirely, but she had taken a chance. She had answered an advertisement from a stranger. She had agreed to travel across the country to marry a man she had never met. And that decision, born of desperation and hope in equal measure, had led to this moment. This full, beautiful, blessed life. "What are you thinking?" Josiah asked, as he had asked countless times over the years. "That I am grateful," she said simply. "For you, for our family, for every moment we have shared. You gave me everything when I thought I had nothing left." "We gave each other everything," he corrected, as he always did. "That is how love works." She smiled and kissed him, not caring that their children and grandchildren were watching. Let them see, she thought. Let them see what real love looks like. Not the easy passion of youth, but the deep, enduring connection built on years of choosing each other every single day. As the party continued around them, as their family celebrated the love that had created them all, Natalie sent up a silent prayer of thanks. For second chances. For patient men who knew how to wait for wounded hearts to heal. For the courage to try again even when everything seemed hopeless. For joy rediscovered. For love that endured. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting everything golden. Natalie leaned into her husband's embrace and watched their grandchildren playing in the yard where their own children had played years before. The cycle continued, generation after generation, all built on the foundation of two lonely people who had found each other and chosen to build something beautiful from their brokenness. It was not the life she had planned. It was not the story she thought she would live. But it was hers, and it was good, and she would not trade a single moment of it. From grief had come joy. From loss had come love. From endings had come new beginnings. And on that warm spring evening, surrounded by the people and place she loved most in the world, Natalie Shepherd was completely, perfectly, joyfully happy.